welcome on this Saturday Night Live. I am your host, Ishmael Perez, author of The Secret Government, Invisible Architects, and Our Cosmic Origin. As many of you know, this work explores the veiled truths and the complex interconnections behind our world's hidden rulers, and of course, revealing humanity's cosmic origins. I hope you guys are having a beautiful day today on the 4th of May. May the force be with you all. On this very day in the year 1930, Mahatma Gandhi got arrested by the British. As many of you know, and for those that didn't know, Mahatma, can't even say his name, Gandhi was a true spiritual warrior, and he was also a politician who incorporated Christed principles. He didn't believe in violence, he didn't believe in resistance, but he believed in teaching according to example. So that's who Mahatma Gandhi was. If you're new to my channel, please hit the subscribe button. And don't forget to share this video since I am competing with my pirated channels. So before I bring in my guest tonight, I wanted to share another fun fact about myself. I love to play the piano. However, I could only play it to ear because I don't know how to read or write music. Go figured, right? So I only play my own riffs. I can't just like listen to a classical hit and then, copy it. But I could sit there and just compose my own symphonies, okay? That's what I do. So I also wanted to remind you all that I did open up a new course starting May the 11th. That's next Saturday. This upcoming course, I'm offering it at only half the price just to make it more affordable. It's a 4-class series scheduled again for May the 11th. I did have a free course today, and unfortunately, it only fit about 100 people. So make sure you sign up quick because it can't go beyond the 100 people limit. But for those that attended, thank you so much for doing so. I appreciate that, guys. Gave you guys a thorough explanation of quantum physics, which is really the new science or the old science that is once again bridging the gap between cutting edge science and ancient metaphysical knowledge. So this sessions, I'm talking about my course, are designed to go deeper into the cosmic origin, exploring dimensions, exploring different advanced civilizations, the organization of universes, and so on and so forth. So I have been, and I will continue to release exclusive content that reveals the research behind my book, The Secret Government, Invisible Architects. Again, that book is a consolidation of 150 literary works put into one book, revealing the true history of the Earth based on the battle between the Dark Brotherhood and the Brotherhood of Light. Now, my guest tonight, Brooks Agnew, who grew up in Pasadena, California, received his bachelor's of science with honors in chemistry from Tennessee Technological University. He is a multi-patented master engineer with more than 30 years of experience consulting for future, let me make sure my volume is all the way up, for future consulting for the Fortune 100. He has 7 amazing best-selling books with 12 titles in print. He is one of the world's most recognized voices in the podcast world today, after 20 years on the web with X Squared Radio. He has been featured on dozens of TV and hundreds of radio programs, as well as numerous scientific documentaries. He currently lives in North Carolina and is the CEO of his own company. Here is Brooks Agnew. Welcome, Brooks. How you doing, brother?
Thank you, Ishmael. Good to be here.
It's an honor to be here. To have you here. Last time you were on my show, I don't know if you remember, it was 2 weeks ago at the New Living Expo. And shortly after, within the hour, it was deleted. So
yeah.
So tell us.
As you were on YouTube, the YouTube police follow me pretty closely.
Oh, yeah. So for now on, I do have to remind my guests that we have to be careful with what we say. But tell us, Brooks, tell us a little bit about your story and your background.
Oh, wow. How much time do we have?
Well, as much time as you want.
Well, first the Earth cooled. No, I could probably start a little more recent than that. I guess when I was in the 8th grade, I had gone a number of years without, missing a math problem. And so I won some kind of award. I don't remember what it was, but the newspaper came to interview me. And the reporterette asked me a question. What do you want to be when you grow up? And I said, this is 1968 now. I said, well, I want to be an asteroid miner. and she did not know what to make of that. We hadn't even been to the moon yet. So I have always felt an affinity for space travel. And I went in the Air Force right out of high school. In fact, I did a co-op at JPL, my first outing in I guess, the employment world. My friends went to work for Hughes Satellite, and they stayed there for their whole careers. And I went in the Air Force and then learned how to build stuff and stayed in school for 16 and a half years. I thought for a while I was a professional student, but I just like learning stuff. So, and I, had a family, so I had to get out and actually earn a living. And that's what I did. I consulted for the Fortune 100 for almost 30 years, integrating multiple disciplines of engineering in order to make them more efficient or to launch new products they'd never had before.
I see. I see. So you've developed a few patents yourself, right?
Yes, I have patents in varied areas. Chemical engineering, so I mastered photopolymers and kind of revolutionized the offset printing industry. I helped develop what was called in those days ground probing radar. Well, you call it HARP now, but I was one of the original pioneers of that back in the early 80s. And consequently, because of my published papers after the non-disclosure agreement expired after 10 years, I published, and then Congressman Gene Manning, who, by the way, was also at that same conference in New Hope, or at the New Hope conference, they contacted me and wanted me to put together a documentary on HARP. So it was the first full-scale documentary ever done on the High Frequency Active Auroral Research Program, and it was a huge hit. I mean, it's probably been watched more than any other documentary on the planet. And then I did a live model of it for History Channel, for Discovery Channel, for True TV Channel, and Science Channel. And in fact, at that conference in San Rafael 2 weeks ago, we filmed part 4 of that documentary. So now we're putting together, or actually Paula Randall Smith, who's the world-class producer of that documentary, is putting together, what would that be? 27 years. There are only 2 of us that aren't still alive, Patrick Flanagan and one other individual that passed away. Bernard Eastland, but the rest of us are still here. So over the years, we've filmed additional parts to that, and it's all coming out now as a compilation of 27 years of research into HARP and the dangers thereof. And that's probably going to come out late this year.
I see. Well, that's going to be an interesting documentary.
Oh,
Now,
it will be.
tell us a little bit about the physics behind HARP. Like, how does it work? How does it manipulate weather?
Oh, okay. Well, Eastland was contracted by the U.S. Navy and the Air Force to come up with a use for a huge natural gas reservoir that they had found on the north slope of Alaska. There was no pipeline there, so they really had to figure out what to do with that right there at that location. So he developed what was called a phased array. These are square wave antennas laid out on a huge acreage, and developed what was called an ionospheric heater. Now, the principle behind it is what we know as the Marconi effect. In the early days of radio, they discovered that they could talk sometimes from New York to London, and sometimes they couldn't, because the ionosphere would kind of flex and move, and they could bounce the AM waves off the ionosphere and skip over the Atlantic. But sometimes you couldn't. So what this was designed to do was heat up the ionosphere, push it out into space about 30, 40 kilometers, and create an artificial Marconi reflective mirror. And then bounce ELF or ULF waves off that mirror and direct it to submarines. And it worked very well. They also discovered 6 other applications for this technology. One is, while they're heating up the ionosphere, pushing it out into space, something has to fill in the void. So as this huge bubble goes out into space, the stratosphere has to move to fill in that void. And when it does, it drags the atmospheric river with it. So they were actually able to manipulate weather patterns by
Mhm.
pushing the atmospheric river around. So that was an application. The other application was those ELF waves and ULF waves, that's extremely low or ultra low frequency waves. The amplitude of those waves could be severely jacked up, like to 1 billion watts, and they could do several things with it. One is they could actually entrain the human brain, and they could induce nightmares, sleeplessness, uh, even make you lose control of your bowels. I mean, there's all kinds of effects that they could do with these waves. And they could also drive those waves into the ground to do two things with it. One is the one I was doing with it in 1983, which was exploring for oil and gas. So they discovered a lot of oil and gas that we never knew was there, like deep beneath North Dakota, for instance. We never knew that was there. There was no way to drill into that or find that with regular seismic technology. It was too deep, but they found it with HARP. The second is those waves could be tuned to resonate with the strata in the ground itself, causing it to sympathetically vibrate with it. And if they had a propensity for an earthquake, it could actually cause an earthquake. And that weapon system was formidable.
Mhm.
Not only could they do it from Alaska, but they refined the instrument and actually mounted it to ships that they could actually use as a weapon system.
Wow. Makes a lot of sense.
It's very scary stuff, and especially when they use it,
Mhm.
because it's a weapon that does not really leave any fingerprints. It's not like there's any shrapnel or label left behind or some unexploded fin or something behind. It doesn't leave any trace. So
Mhm.
once the earthquake happens, the ship just sails away, and we say, "What earthquake? Are you crazy?"
So, how many artificial induced earthquakes would you say have been created ever since HARP
Hmm.
came into existence?
I don't know the number, but there are some telltale signs when the atmospheric version is used.
Mhm.
One is there's kind of an ultraviolet rainbow that occurs above the site that's being irradiated because the frequencies build up energy in the air so much. It has to go somewhere. And so in a clear sky, it just releases photons in the form of color, and we can see them with our eyes. So we have seen this, and it has been reported and has been photographed numerous times. Chile, uh, Japan, Turkey, these areas where these massive, very shallow quakes have occurred. There's also been this ultraviolet hue in the sky that's been recorded. And people now know what to look for when HARP is being used as a weapon.
Interesting, interesting. Tell us more about some of the other technologies that you were exposed to. I mean, if you have any recollection of them, in the private sector.
Um, Well, of course, my expertise is in high speed manufacturing. That's where really the most value comes from. People want to launch a new product, they need several pieces of equipment that humans they can do, but not reliably and repeatably. For instance, inline or end of line testing. Like we
Mhm.
want to test a mask, or we want to test a radio, or we want to test a seatbelt firing mechanism. You have to have that done 100%. It has to be done very quickly. You don't have all day to test it, and you have to keep a detailed record of it so that one day, if that does fail to operate in the field, you can drive it back to the day and the hour that it was manufactured and try to correct the problem. So that's been most of my design has been in tooling and testing and things like that. But some of the technology has been amazing. Like Patrick Flanagan, for instance, invented what's called the neurophone. And Nick Begich brought that to very practical use. In I don't know if you know who Patrick Flanagan was, but he created the neurophone, which are these little tiny thin metal discs, And you could put these metal discs against the occipital bones or against your elbow, and you could play sound through them at a certain frequency or set of frequencies, and you could hear them in your brain without going through the ears. And how he demonstrated this, he applied for a patent. It was turned down. The examiner said, nah, that's impossible.
Mhm.
So Patrick went to the patent office and he took his neurophones with him. And he said, so do you have anybody here in this building who is deaf? And they said, yeah, as a matter of fact, we do. We have a guy on such a, well, bring him. So they brought this guy who was, I guess, a programmer or a writer, and he was deaf. And he fitted him with the neurophones, and he spoke into the machine, and the guy said, I can hear your words. So he got the patent. Well, that technology is actually being used in firefighters' masks now, because, you know, when you're putting on a mask and you're carrying a tank and the engine's running and the pump's running and the fire's going and there's all kinds of sound, you can't hear. Even if you're wearing, you know, earbuds, you can't hear. There's too much external noise. Plus, a lot of these firefighters are hearing impaired anyway.
Mhm.
So it has the neurophones in them that are fixed to the temples. They actually fit in the mask and they fit right against your temples. And the firefighters love it because they're not using their ears to hear. They're hearing directly into their brain. So this technology is out there and it's very cutting edge, very cool stuff.
Sounds like it. Now, does this have anything, or is it related to that voice to skull technology that they use within the, you know, military industrial complex to, I guess, put voices in people's minds and stuff?
Yes and no. So, you know, these you're wearing, and obviously it induces the voice in your head. The one that we developed for harp was a little bit different application. Where it got its field test was during Desert Storm. During Desert Storm, of course, we didn't know this because we were being fed a bunch of misinformation. But the Allies were going to charge across the border of Kuwait, and they were actually going to drive right through the most fortified area of desert in the world. Like the Iraqi Republican Guard had been fortified there for like 30 years. And they've been, you know, kicking Iran's ass for a long time with this fortified barrier. Well, we're going to drive right through it. So they irradiated this area for a month with HARP. And it drove the soldiers in the bunkers, which were highly fortified. I mean, unbelievable amount of ordnance it would have taken to dig up all those bunkers and make it possible for tanks to roll all the way to Baghdad without a casualty. And that's exactly what they did, because all the soldiers went insane. As soon as the Allies showed up, they opened that bunker and they poured out onto the sand and surrendered because they hadn't slept in a month. They've been driven insane with HARP.
So, do you know anything about the triangular spacecraft known as the TikToks?
You mean the, what is it, the TR-83 or something like that? I have seen lots of drawings. I've seen lots of animations. Right down here in the Cashiers Mountains, which is right between the border of North Carolina and Georgia, they have been sighted. Some of them have been photographed. Of course, they're all night photographs, and they could just see the triangular lights. The assertion is that this ship can fly very slow and very quiet because it uses allegedly anti-gravity technology. That's what I know about it.
Now, I also heard that it could convert it as a submarine, right? It could also go underwater.
Well, if it does that, it's going to have to basically create a unified field for the ship itself,
Right.
because the ships that we have that are manned, they can only go to about 1,000 feet. That's it. After that, the water pressure just smashes them. Now, there are special craft called bathyscaphs, but they're very special, and they're usually only 1 or 2 or 3 person ships, and they're very slow. So if it's going to withstand the pressure of the water, it's going to have to create its own unified field to keep the water pressure back.
Interesting, interesting. Now, I did want to touch base on your missing time, because apparently you've probably worked within the private sector, right?
Hmm.
Off world. Do you have any recollection of what you did in your off world?
I don't recall ever being off world, but I did have a lost time incident. And believe me, Ishmael, I've gone back 1,000 times, more than 1,000 times in my memories to try to find out what happened that day. But it was the summer of 1965. We were in the Sierra Nevada mountains at a campsite at about 9,000 feet. It was way up there. But we were the only family camping in that campground at the time. It was late summer. School was going to start in a couple of weeks, so I know it was late summer. And what happened was I got up early, I guess 7:30 or so. My mother and grandparents didn't want to get up yet. They wanted to sleep in. So I said, well, I'm taking my tackle box and my pole, and I'm walking up here to the creek, and I'm going to see if I can catch some fish. So I went up there. And I don't know, most 9-year-old boys don't sit there and cast very long without catching anything before now it's time to skip stones or something. They get bored pretty easy. And so that went on probably for a few minutes. And then I just gathered up my pole and my tackle box and turned around and walked back down to where we were camped. Except that when I turned the corner around the bathrooms, they had the block building that was the bathrooms. When I walked around the bathrooms to come into line of sight with our campsite, the Rangers mint green Jeep pickup truck was there, and he was standing outside talking to my mother, who was fully dressed, had her arms folded, and she was not happy. So I could tell when my mom wasn't happy from like way off.
Mm-hmm.
And as I approached, they faced me and basically said, hey, where have you been? I said, what do you mean, where have I been? I told you I was just going up here to do a little fishing. And that's when the Rangers said, son, you have been gone all day. It was like 5 o'clock at night already. And of course, I swore up and down, there's no way I was gone all day long. I'm hungry, you know?
Mm-hmm.
So he said, no, we had everybody out looking for you. And that's just not possible. I just wasn't there. So you'd think that's just the imagination of a 9-year-old boy. But when school started 2 weeks later, I knew everything. I was blurting out all the answers. I could answer every math question on the board before she could finish writing it. The SRA readers, I read the whole box. Just read the whole box. I don't know if you remember what SRA readers are, but they're kind of a self-paced reading instruction box. In those days, it was provided to classrooms. I think you had red, green, blue, and yellow, and depending on the level of your comprehension, you could read the stories, answer the questions, and then go on to the next booklet. I just read the whole box. It got so bad that halfway through my third grade, I think it was the third grade, might have been the fourth grade. I think it was the third grade. My parents pulled me out of school and sent me to military school for 3 years.
Do you think that was synchronicity? Do you think it was probably planned, right? It wasn't by accident, I would say.
Oh, I don't think it was by accident. I think I got some kind of upgrade that day because when that school year started, I was already a college student.
So how did it feel? Like, what was going on through your mind when that happened?
Honestly, I felt like I woke up in the body of a 9-year-old boy. I didn't have all the memories of that I have now because I've gone back so many times to think about where I came from before I was 9 years old. But honestly, I felt out of step. I felt like an adult in a boy's body. I'll give you another example. It was probably a few weeks after that. We had one of those console televisions, right? It was one of those ones you don't have to worry about anybody stealing because it would take 4 people to pick it up. But in those days, televisions would get like a vertical roll to it, and you couldn't control it with the vertical hold knob, and so you just stopped watching it. And so what I did is I unplugged the TV, took the back off the TV, pulled all the tubes out of the TV, put them in a box, put them on my bicycle, rode up to the electronics shop at the top of the hill by Long Beach State, tested all the tubes, replaced the ones that didn't test good, rode back down, put all the tubes back in the TV, and I was putting the back on it when my brother came in, and he's 9 years older than him. He was already in college.
Mhm.
And he basically said, Jesus Christ, Brooks, what are you doing? I said, well, I'm putting the TV back together again. Oh, my God. I mean, if mom catches you, put that back together again. So I plugged it back in, and there was a perfect picture.
Mhm.
That's the kind of stuff I could do after that summer.
Well, you've heard of this idea of walking into a body, right? Like extraterrestrial entities walking into bodies. Do you think that's
Not till I was in my 50s. I didn't know anything about it when I was 9.
okay. So you think it could have been a walk-in, right?
Yes, but that would imply that there's somebody else in here, and
Mhm.
I don't think that's the case.
I see. Yeah. Very interesting. So you mentioned that you were always very extremely intelligent, like you have a high IQ. Um, do you recall any missing time during your school years, like say when you were in first, second, or third grade?
Well, just that one time, in the summer of '65. But I'm not saying that I didn't have other downloads. I did. I had one when I was 19. I had one when I was 52, and the one when I was 52 was profound. I mean, it like woke me up for the last time, and I never went to sleep. It just different times in my life, going into meditation or walking by myself in the woods, I just get this flood of pure information. It's not like precursor information, it's finished information. I still have to figure it out after it gets in my head, but very
Yeah,
powerful stuff.
yeah, I know that feeling. I call it getting huge data dumps, transmissions.
Yeah, that's what it's like. Exactly.
So tell us about the what is your perspective on what's going on here as far as the uh, our interactions with extraterrestrials? Like, what do you think's happening?
Well, that's a big question because I try to approach these things scientifically. Like, I'm not a believer. Okay, I like data, reliability, repeatable data that's corroborated.
Mhm.
So, one of the things that we can accept as a set of data is that UFOs exist. Too many people have seen them over too long a time in ancient times, medieval times, modern times, whether they appear in paintings or whether they appear in pictures or carvings or drawings, we know they're there. So now that that question is answered, we have to ask ourselves, who's driving them? Who's driving them? So if we just keep this in a binary line, we could say they're off-worlders or say ultra dimensional beings or they're earthlings, just
Mhm.
much, much older than we are, like from another zenith from another million years ago. So let's explore both of those. If they're ultra terrestrials, that is to say they come from Earth, but they come from another age and another day. Their society was either wiped out and they're the remnant, or they decided not to interact with us at all, and there are many more of them than we expect. I suppose that's possible. It is possible, but it's probably more likely that they're from somewhere else. Now, if they're from somewhere else, I doubt very seriously that they jumped in any kind of can and rode at a road at anything close to the speed of light for 100 or 200 years to get here to Earth. It's just not practical. Can't happen. But the technology to be able to slide between dimensions so that you could go from, say, one star system to another star system in a week instead of 7,000 years, that technology probably exists. And so that's what I think we're probably encountering here. So now that that question's answered, we ask the next one. Where did they come from and what are they doing here? Let's think about the last one first. Let's again break it into a binary set of questions. Are they working with our governments or are our governments working with them? because it's clear you and I aren't working with them. I mean, they're not coming to these conferences and showing up and meeting with ordinary people. They're working through governments.
Right.
So let's answer the two questions. So if we're working with them, what are we giving to them in exchange for the advanced technology?
I would say human genetics.
Yeah, I'd say us, right? I mean,
Pretty much.
this is the greatest show in the universe here, and we are the ultimate combination of godlike creatures.
Mhm.
So yeah, they're giving us to them, like they have the authority to do that. But let's just say they're doing it. That's pretty detestable, I think. But let's ask the other question. What if they are here working with our governments? Now, if that's the case, they're responsible for this mess we're in right now. And if they've been here a long time, or they've been coming here for a long time, all I got to do is go back and look at history. And we researched 44 ancient cultures. And guess what we found? We found that every single one of those cultures records dealings with what they call gods or angels or enlightened ones or shining ones, not from around here, and that they gave them technology.
Mhm.
And that even goes for the Native Americans. When we look at, and I mentioned this to you 2 weeks ago, when Christopher Columbus arrived here, there were indigenous peoples here, right? So what were they doing? What were these peoples doing? Well, they were killing each other. The Lakota, the Blackfoot, the Cherokee, the Arapaho, the Apache, they were all riding for hundreds of miles on horseback and wiping out other villages.
Mhm.
Why? There's plenty of buffalo, plenty of trout, plenty of berries, plenty of land, plenty of sky. Why in the world were they committing genocide on each other? Because their gods told them to. So they've been here on this planet and they've been messing with us forever.
Do you know anything about the different genetic farmer races, those that are experimenting with genetic modifications? And
Well, yeah, I mean, we have record of humans doing that. We call it eugenics. Uh, and I think world leaders do that for a couple different reasons. One is to create kind of trouble-free worker race, not somebody so stupid that you have to feed him with a spoon, but just smart enough to be able to run a machine or swing a hammer or drive a truck or a bus, but not smart enough to cause any problems. Not somebody smart enough to think, say, politically or cause any kind of trouble at the polls, But there's another class, and that is the Romans, the Nazis, various races that wanted to create a superior race, a chosen race. And our history, human history, is full of that. So there's been genetic manipulation going on for a long time. And I don't think they came by natural. I think they were taught it by these off-worlders.
yeah, I agree. I think this ongoing genetic experimentations have actually been going on, would you say, since the gods were on the earth 450 years ago?
Yes. Well, I noticed in your chat room someone said that's a sweeping generalization about Native American cultures. Well, go do your research because it's everywhere. It's everywhere. That's why I said it.
Yeah, I mean, when you look at the history of the Olmecs, we're talking about the Mesoamerican natives, those that predated the Mayans and the Aztecs. Who do you think?
BC.
Yeah, who do you think their god was? The serpent god, Quetzalcoatl.
Quetzalcoatl. Yeah, Quetzalcoatl was an interesting character because he was represented as a feathered serpent being a very wise being, but obviously had some sort of heavenly power over these people because look what he inspired them to build. which is quite fantastic. The walls, the temples, and there are lots and lots of temples in the Yucatan as yet still undiscovered in the jungle. The ones that we see are the ones the government spent the money to clean all the dirt and stuff off of. But almost to a temple, it took a significant amount of the gross national product of those people to build those things. And I would say, without exception, not one of those temples did anything for those people. It didn't create anything. It didn't build anything to house anybody. It didn't do anything for those people. They worked their fingers to the bone, working granite and fitting it to a specific design that these advanced beings came up with. And then they perished. The people perished. In fact, in a lot of cases, those temples, once they were finished, they were dedicated by sacrificing tens of thousands of people on them. It's crazy, the blood that was spilt to build those buildings.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, a lot of sacrifice, HUMAN, sacrifices took place on those buildings. And I would say that it was Quetzalcoatl, also known as Kukulkan, right? Same figure.
Kukulkan, right?
Kukulkan, yeah. Would you say that they were negative entities?
Yeah, I would say, because it caused the death of a lot of people and really did not benefit the people at all. I could see teaching them to farm or teaching them to log or teaching them, advanced irrigation or reservoir, storage of water for irrigation. Didn't teach them any of that. Taught them how to kill and sacrificed a lot of them to build those temples.
Now, have you ever heard of the connection between Thoth and Kukulkan, of Thoth and Quetzalcoatl?
No, but it's interesting that if you look at the Pikal tomb lid, the Pikal tomb lid is sort of the key to understanding the Mayan calendar. It had depicted in the tomb lid itself a mechanism called the wheels of time untime. And it was interesting because it was a date keeping system that I thought was quite ingenious, quite accurate. 13 months, not 12, and each month had 28 days. And then there was one day of time untime, sort of like like a New Year's Day, and then the year starts over again. And somehow when the quote Christians came in and enlightened these people, they considered that a cult and destroyed that date keeping system. But mathematically, it was very accurate for thousands of years. It even took into consideration the precession through the equinoxes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, makes a lot of sense. We do have a question from Patricia Whippler, I believe. She's asking, with what we know about Space Force, and how does that work into the final timeline ascension or rapture event? Do they assist our friends with the arcs?
That's a good question. I wrote a book called Asteroid Mining: The Future of Energy, and I have 3 chapters on the Space Force in it. And I studied the Space Force as they were developing it and kind of taking the reins away from what we call Space Command, which in those days was run by the Air Force. Very corrupt. Oh my gosh, talk about money laundering. And it was the military. Military was the space program. So when Space Force was formed, it was because private industry had gotten into the space program and showed us a better way, showed us how to reuse rockets, showed us how to create open source firmware and software for satellites, so that as companies were amalgamated or systems grew, that old firmware and software could be upgraded. And we created, the industry created what's called CubeSats. So they didn't have a different unique satellite for every single thing, which went on for 40 freaking years. Now they have a standard satellite that they call a CubeSat. It's about the size of a cooler that you would put ice and drinks in. And the boards and everything that it takes to put those together are pretty standard. it creates some risks. Like one of the risks is that they can be hacked pretty easily.
Mhm.
And one of the first meetings I had, which was, I want to say 2008. So this is very early on, 2008 and a half it was. I met with one general, two colonels at Fort Bragg, and we were talking about this technology, and they were very concerned, like paranoid concern about cybersecurity because the satellites were kind of open source. I mean, kind of like somebody with a laptop could hack into them.
Mhm.
And the problem was you could turn the little beggars into bumper cars and start slamming them all over low Earth orbit, and you got a big problem. So Space Force was developed, first of all, to standardize the cybersecurity, to keep bad actors from meddling in the drive systems and the firmware systems of the satellites and keep things under control. The second job of the Space Force was to facilitate the transfer of technology from government to private industry, because private industry was going to turn space profitable and pull it away from the weapons mentality of Space Command, which is what it was. We were putting weapons in space, and so were they. And the third was to oversee commerce in space, because it's not just putting technology in space. You got to do stuff with it. We got to go to the moon. We got to harvest helium-3. We got to go to the asteroids and harvest huge amounts of precious metals and make spaceships out of asteroids. Big stuff, big stuff. But it's all driven by private industry because there's profit in it. And right now, the gold rush is on, baby. And that's why this Space Force is there, is to make sure space piracy does not occur. So that once it's all developed, the Chinese don't just take a force up there and take control of it. Because one thing we know for sure, and we say this all the time, he who controls the moon will control Earth.
That is so true, my friend. That explains why some of these negative extraterrestrials that have been in control of our world for thousands of years have been broadcasting us into a frequency fence, unable to leave the planet.
Yep.
And the reincarnation, also the samsara, the reincarnational process, right, of coming back to 3D reality, so that our soul cannot exit the matrix. That is so true. So from what I've gathered in the last few years is that the alliance, right, has actually recuperated the moon from these negative entities. Would you say that's correct?
I don't know. I mean, I'm not a believer in the alliance. I'm not a believer in a federation of planets, although I've heard it half my life. I'm working with people like Planetoid Minds, and these are people that make hardware for space. They make effectors, they make power supplies, they make rocket containers. And one of the things that the whole industry is struggling with right now is helium-3 fusion. Nobody's done it yet. We know it can be done. We know what the reaction looks like. The industry's been working on something called ITER, ITER. It's in France. It's an enormous building. We've spent $40 billion on that thing, and it's still not done. It's probably going to take another $40 billion to finish it, if they ever do. But it's designed to create a plasma, suspend a plasma, and you got to keep it from touching any of the walls, because if it does, it self-annihilates. So you want to create the plasma, and you want to hold it in a magnetic field, and then you need to smash it uniformly so that it actually forms a solid, and the fusion occurs. We have done it with what's called a tokamak for about 2 milliseconds, and then it all comes apart. Helium-3 fusion, we've managed to do it cold. That is to say, it takes more energy to make it happen than we get back out. But not helium-3 to helium-3. We've done it with deuterium. We've done it with tritium. But you got too many energetic neutrons after that, and the whole darn thing's radioactive. And one of the beauties of helium-3 fusion is there's no radiation. There's no energetic neutrons, only the 2 protons that come off, and of course a tremendous amount of energy. So my proposal in the book, and I believe is the true proposal, is to not do it on the Earth, but to do it on the moon,
Mhm.
because we don't have that much gravity to worry about. There's no atmosphere to speak of to worry about. And so we overcome the two infrastructural challenges that we have with ITER, which is namely gravity and air. We don't have that on the moon. So we could do it at a fraction the structure.
Mhm.
And once we make it happen, we solve two problems. Number one is in the Shackelford crater, there's enough helium-3 to power Earth for 10,000 years. 10,000 years. Energy becomes so cheap, you don't even need meters because you don't need to get paid for it. The value added to the community is worth way more than what the cost of the energy is. And the second is you achieve fusion rocketry, which takes Mars and reduces it from 7 months on the short end, 2 years on the long end, to
Mhm.
70 days. Now it gets much more practical. The Hohmann maneuver becomes routine instead of so risky we lose half the aircraft or half the spacecraft that we shoot at Mars. And that's where we're at. Now, I don't know anything about anti-gravity drive or star travel, or I know what a petawatt generator is, but I also know there isn't enough energy on Earth. It would take 40 Earths to run a petawatt generator. Obviously not practical.
Did you ever hear about that artificial sun that was being developed by China through fusion?
Yeah. Yeah. And they were able to do it for, like I said, about a millisecond. The
Mhm.
problem is containment. You can
Mhm.
do it for a short amount of time, but you can't keep it together because the fusion wants to escape. And to start it requires an atom bomb, which is the only way we know how to start it, but it's not very practical.
Mm-mm. Yeah, not a good thing to do. But
No,
you did mention the moon and the asteroid belt. So obviously, you don't believe that there is a dome and that the Earth isn't flat.
I am not a domer, and there is nothing in the universe that's flat, not even time.
Great explanation. I agree with you, brother. And would you agree that it was a CIA psyops to confuse the people?
Oh yeah, absolutely. In fact, I'm really amazed at how some of the stuff is has gotten away from them because it takes smart people. It takes people like you and me and others. It takes really smart people to make this psyop stuff work. You
Mhm.
can't do it with stupid people. You have to have smart people and you have to understand ramifications of what you're doing. So the Army actually has a new site. It's called goarmysof.com. And if you go there, they're actively recruiting PSYOP officers. It's brand new. And I mean, this is like this week it went live. So it's, believe me, they're actively recruiting right now because they're about to scale this up on a level you can only imagine.
You mean the flat Earth theory?
No, just maybe flat Earth, but the whole misinformation thing to keep
Yeah.
the general public so confused and so, well, let's call it sycophantic for one cult or another, that the truth, it never shows up.
Now, were you the one who told me a couple weeks ago that you knew the guy who admitted it that the flat Earth theory was a psyops who worked for the CIA? Was it you?
No, it wasn't me, but I
Um,
wouldn't put it past them.
yeah. Okay. Now, since we both agree that the Earth isn't flat and that there is no dome, um, let's talk about like off-world colonies. Right? You are familiar with the breakaway groups, right?
I am familiar with the story, and believe me, I know. I mean, I was best friends with Andy Basciago for a long time back when he had his eyesight and he could get around and speak at events. I met him in 2006. Fascinating individual. It kind of started the whole, 20 years in back program, the whole Pegasus program. He's the originator of all of that.
All right, can you tell us a little bit about what he shared with you or what he told you?
Yeah, sure. And some of it makes sense to me because as a kid of a NASA engineer, uh, we were we were scooped up by the universities. I was scooped up by Long Beach State,
Mhm.
especially after that showing in the third grade. And by that time, I was in the fourth grade. I was a specimen at the university. I spoke before college classes. Could have been child psychology classes, but I don't think so. I think they were science classes. And I worked in crystal labs and the water crystal labs, frozen labs, and the ESP and advanced mathematics and all kinds of stuff. And I wasn't the only one. There were other NASA engineers kids who were also drafted into the program, and Andy was one of those kids. So he was drafted into the same program I was, and he ended up ostensibly at El Segundo, where there is, he claims, a Pegasus jump room, and that they actually had two capabilities with this room. One was they could see through time like a window, both the past and the future, and they could also travel. So they were jumping from Earth to Mars and back. And he claims that he spent 20 years in that service. And I know him very well. He's younger than I am, and yet he has advanced macular degeneration like a 90-year-old.
Wow. Did he mention anything else other than the jump rooms?
Well, what he calls the chronovisor, which is a technology where you can actually see through time.
Mhm.
Now, the technology behind this is real, but it has limitations. In the government that I'm familiar with, they call it looking glass,
Mhm.
and it, what it does, it works on probabilities. It does have some AI with it, some artificial intelligence, which solves a lot of the problems that we used to do with computers, but they're way too slow. And what you do is go back to a specific time and place, and it deals with the probabilities of what was possible at that time or what will be possible in the future. The issue with it is that once you see that, if you take any action to alter it, you've now changed the path again. So the
Mhm.
future changes again. So they learned very early on that they can't just go to the future, see what's going to happen, and then put something together like their little Davos group to put some psyop or some investment in place to head that off. Because as soon as they do, they've changed the future again. They found that the future was fluid. And I write about this in my book, Remembering the Future, where I actually teach people how to do this on purpose. Put things into the future that they want to put in the future, and then come back to the past, which is the present, and watch for the things that have changed,
Mhm.
and then put energy into those things, and that future thing manifests. So we're actually using their own technology and we're messing with it. And you know
Mhm.
what it's done? Now 20 million people are doing it. Uh, they can't control the world anymore. The Davos crowd has no effing idea what is going to happen. They have lost control of their planet.
I agree. I agree. And do you think that's the reason why people are awakening and why the matrix is shattering and we're going to be heading into some sort of, transition into a better world?
Well, I think the cause and effect are backwards. We're awakening, and that's what's causing this to happen. And the reason we're awakening is because some of us early on, I've been doing this for 20 years, and there are people doing it longer than me. We're going out, like you and I went to a conference in San Rafael a couple of weeks ago, and there were a few hundred people there, and they heard our words, and they were enlightened, and they went home and they took a piece of that light with them, and they shared it with their friends, and they shared it with their friends. And this awakening is what happens at the live events. If you don't come to the live events, you can't get inside the energy field of another human being. You can't become enlightened. You can't watch this on a podcast and be enlightened. It's a energy transfer from one human to another. So
Mhm.
you have to come to the live events and you have to get in close in order to receive that download.
Yep, I totally agree. We do have a question from Cosmic Goddess. She wants to know, do you think in this matrix we're living in, a computer-generated dream world, and going to wake up and when we ascend, or going to wake up when we ascend? Your thoughts on this, please.
This is a great question. Wow. Uh, I started keeping journals when I was 13. And one of the questions that I wrestled with very early on in my journals was, are we asleep right now and then we wake up when we die? Or is it the other way around? You know, and what I realized is that the human body is a peripheral. It's a peripheral for the spirit. Now, the spirit is immense and it's eternal. That is to say, we're older than worlds, way older than worlds. But the human body is a peripheral for it. And when we are matched up with this peripheral, and that happens, I guess, in ways I don't fully understand, but when we're matched up with this peripheral, we bring with us three forms of memory. We bring a chemical memory, which we get from our parents because they have propensities in their DNA that are combined and handed down to us. So we can run fast, we can see far, we can play music, we have propensities for mathematics. That's a chemical memory. We also have a star memory
Mhm.
because the matter that was used to build our initial fetus was entangled with certain star formations at that time of year. And for about 12 years, that matter was an integral part of our body. After that, we begin changing it out and other, star matters used to make us. But that entangles us with matter generators in space that irradiate Earth. And the third is our light memory. Now, this is the memory that goes all the way back to the beginning, to when Source decided to go through this square root function and create us in the first place. And we have been spiraling through one mortality after another, after another, after another to get where we are right now. But by the time we're 12 years old, we've learned a new language. We've learned about gravity. We've learned to wipe our own butt. We are totally indoctrinated by our environment and our parents, the matrix that your listener is talking about.
Mhm.
And we forget who we are. And so what we have to do, I think should be part of regular education in school. We need to teach people to reach back through the light and try to bring forward who we have been for millions of years. Because if we could do this early on, like I didn't fully wake up till I was 52. I didn't write my first book till I was 52 years old. Now I have 12 in print. Gosh, what would have happened if I'd have done that at 12 or 14 or 19? If we could help people do that, we'd break the matrix.
So, who do you think created this matrix?
I think it was Lucifer.
Yeah.
Lucifer was one of the beings that got involved early on, and he's in just about every record that man has in his possession. I was going to say that recorded, but I don't actually think the Bible is an actual record of anything. It's just a book, and maybe it's inspirational to read it, but gosh, it doesn't take very long to get through it. You get through Genesis 6, you're already introduced to 5 races, none of whom are from here. And how many people get that out of their preacher? None, because they're in the matrix. They don't see what their own words say.
Mhm.
So once we see through that, once we see that we are eternal beings having a mortal experience, then you realize that somebody very early on tried to mess with the entire thing. And when Lucifer came in and beguiled Eve, which I believe impregnated Eve and she had Cain,
Mhm.
that's where the matrix began.
Mhm. Yep.
Lucifer tried to teach us that we are nothing more than a physical being. There ain't nothing before and there ain't nothing after this. In fact, I think the Nephilim are responsible for all world religions, all of them. And then they taught each religion to annihilate all the other religions. What a great idea.
And they're still doing that up
Yes,
until
they're still
modern
doing
times.
it.
I mean, what do
In
you
fact,
think?
I defy anybody, and I'm a scientist and a biblical scholar. Show me what religion God founded, or Jesus for that matter. They didn't. Jesus didn't come here to teach us of his divinity. We already knew that. He came here to teach us of our divinity, not his
Mhm.
divinity.
Now, would you agree that this demon, this snake, this serpent that impregnated Eve into having Cain, was what the Gnostics call the demiurge, and was also the Enki of the Anunnaki tablets, right, or the ancient Sumerian tablets?
That's hard to know because according to Sitchin, who allegedly translated these Sumerian texts, the Enki and Enlil came from a close pass of a planet called Nibiru, and they actually came to Earth. And one of the things about Nibiru is it has a degenerating atmosphere, and it needs monatomic gold in order to reflect or regenerate solar radiation so that they can survive. Earth has a plethora of gold, although there are lots of asteroids that have way more gold than Earth does, and it's much more readily available, but they came to Earth. So ostensibly, we were nothing more than apes in those days. And so they uh, played with our DNA to create a more intelligent ape to mine gold for them. It
Mhm.
made for a very interesting story, and I didn't buy any of it. So I don't think that Enki and Enlil actually played a role the way Zachariah Sitchin maintained.
So, would you say that Zachariah Sitchin was somewhat a psyops in a way where
Maybe. I think he was spinning a yarn and he made good money.
he did? Would you say that he was also part of the cabal in a way, working with the NWO?
Hard to say because the New World Order really didn't. Well, I say this. Hang on a second, because the New World Order was really the Old World Order. I mean, for thousands and thousands of years, Earth was ruled by one man with his wooden ships, one man at a time, not the same guy all the way through, but the Romans, the Brits. I mean, somebody ruled the world. But then in 1776, because of the insulation of the Atlantic Ocean, and maybe because of these teenagers that were a little wayward and very forward thinking, and
Mhm.
by teenagers, I mean 18, 19, and 20 years old. That's how old Jefferson, Madison, that's how old these guys were. They learned to read the way everybody in the world learned to read English, by reading the Bible. And they knew the story intimately. We march inexorably down a path toward Armageddon and we die. Well, they didn't like that future. So they said, we got a new world here. We have a new place. The king is, out of sight, out of mind, baby. This is our land, our force, our minds. Let's choose a new future.
Mhm.
And lo and behold, a land and a government built on liberty and freedom evolved. Now, I got to tell you, Ishmael, I read a lot of ancient scripture, a lot of ancient prognostications from prophets, seers, and revelator. None of them predicted a land in the future built on freedom and liberty. None. This was brand spanking new. These guys chose a new future and they changed the world. And for 243 years, those guys have been wanting their world back. That's where the old world order came from. And it's what we call the new world order is trying to get their world back.
Mhm.
And they're almost there.
We're talking about Klaus Schwab and his people, right?
Yeah, the Schwabites, the
Mhm.
Davos people, the fascists, they're all part of Lucifer's team, which is designed to plunge the world back into slavery and ignorance where it was in 1775.
Mhm. So, who do you think our founding fathers were?
I think they were a bunch of punks, which had a great education and great ability to communicate. They
Mhm.
were in their 20s and 19, 18 years old, and they're like any teenager that age. 10 feet tall and indestructible. And they said, we're going to form this new nation and we're going to fight for it. And that's what they did.
Yeah, there were the rebels against the European oligarchs in the Vatican.
Oh, yeah. And they had a chance of a snowball in hell. I mean, the sun never set on the British Empire. They had the guns, they had the training, they had the troops. There was no way that the American colonists could have survived against Britain, not without France, not without Russia. In fact, if it wasn't for Russia, this country would never have been formed.
So you think the czars of Russia had a lot to do in the formation of this country?
No, in that particular time was Catherine the Great. So
Yeah.
not a czar, but one of the most powerful women in the world. Mm-hmm. And she's the one that simmered down the British Empire and said, now, wait a minute, you got to let these colonists say their piece. And she's the one that kept it in check.
Mm-hmm. And she was also part of the Masonic, you could say, networks.
Yeah. I mean, my family was. I visited my family castle in Stranraer, Scotland, which is on Agnew Bay, on Agnew Crescent. And the castle was built in 1344, and the Agnew line goes back to the year 695. And somewhere between the years 695 and 1344, we became very involved in Freemasonry. It's all over our castle, all over our symbolism. And we were the hereditary sheriffs of Galloway. So we fought everybody, the Norse, the Romans, the Brits on the west coast of Scotland, which is why to this day, there are not many Agnews in the phone book, because my ancestors were usually the second to the last man standing in these battles. Mm-hmm. And so when I go back to Stranraer to visit the Agnews, it's still a very small line. The Freemasonry goes all the way back to the temple builders of Tyre, which is who Solomon employed to build their temple. So this goes way back. I don't even know, 20,000 years maybe.
Wow.
But when the what are called the Knights of the Templar decided to use these rites and these technologies to build, let's call it the modern banking system, because at that time there was in the medieval times, 1400s, 1500s, there were people that wanted to travel from Europe to Jerusalem. It was a pilgrimage. And the issue is that they were victimized along the way, because obviously to travel from, say, Ireland or from Germany and go all the way to Jerusalem and back, you got to carry a fair amount of supplies with you. And it's usually in the form of gems or gold or silver, because it's a universal currency. And it didn't take very long for robbers to figure out that, hey, these travelers going down to Jerusalem, they got the bucks. So they were robbing them right and left. So the Knights Templar said, I think we got a better way. If you'll give us your jewels here in Germany, we will issue you an account. And then you just take this piece of paper with you or this parchment with you. And when you need supplies, you could stop at another Knights Templar place, and you can write a check. Really, it was called a check. You can write a check and they will give you enough to get you by, the hotel and meals and whatever you need here, provision for horses, and then you can go your merry way. Mm-hmm. And so they created the first banking system. Well, it didn't take long, because all these locals, are taking in deposits from these pilgrims. Mm-hmm. It didn't take long for the rumor to get out that's where all the money is. The Templars have it. And so Philip the Fair decided he's going to rob them. He's going to take his army and he's going to sweep through all of the Templar castles and steal all the gold, all the silver, and all the jewels. And when they got there, it was missing. They didn't have it. I guess they knew they were coming, or buried it deep and wide, and they never found it. So they went from castle to castle and they tortured them to try to find this wealth. And they ended up in Rosslyn, Scotland. and Rosalind's about 60 miles from my hometown, and the hereditary sheriffs of Galloway were there. They tortured Jacques de Molay, and he refused to tell them anything. And that martyrdom is what created modern day Freemasonry.
Yeah, I do. I talk about that in my book, The Secret Government Invisible Architects, how after the persecution of the Knights Templars, all they did was reorganize and became the Freemasons. And they were also connected to the, I don't know if you ever heard about this connection to the Brotherhood of the Sea, the original pirates. Have you ever heard of them?
Yes. Yeah.
And how
These pirates, by the way, it was a kind of an ongoing enterprise, and the Sikhs weren't the only ones that did it. There were also Arabs that did it, and they were very active in doing it. And Thomas Jefferson ran into some in England when he was there visiting. And at the time, I think George Washington was still president. He asked them, why are you, raiding our ships? We didn't do anything to you. Why are you attacking our ships at sea? And they told him because we're Muslim and everybody else in the world is infidels, and we'll take what we want when we want. And so Jefferson said, okay, enough said. He comes back to the US, goes to Washington, says, I want to form the Marines. We're going to train these people. We're going to get our own ships. And Washington said, what do you mean ships? We sold all the ships to pay for the war. Mm-hmm. And Jefferson said, I don't care. We need ships. I need men. I'm going to train them as Marines and train them to fight at sea with swords. And they did. And they wore collars that were made of leather. That's where the leather neck came from. And the reason they wore the leather collars is because these pirates used to chop off the heads. And so they trained them to deflect those headshots and fight at sea. So sure enough, Jefferson takes his Marines, they sail to Tripoli, and they defeat the pirates on the shores of Tripoli. It's in the song. And the interesting thing about this irony is when Barack Obama built ISIS, they took those pilots that they had captured and marched them out onto the shores of Tripoli and beheaded them. It was Barack Obama's way of saying, we're back and it's game on again.
When we talk about him, let's call him the guy who's married to Big Mike, if you know what I mean. Big Mike.
Oh, yeah, I got it.
Yeah. You know the truth behind, right? What happened to his real husband, who later became a female.
Wow.
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't know how we all fell for that, but we did.
You don't believe it, huh? That he's married.
Yeah, I know what shoulders look like. That's kind of hard thing to change.
I guess we're all going to find out soon, right? So tell us about what do you know about the Jesuits? Because that's another thing, another group that I mentioned in my book.
I don't know much about them except that they were a very bloodthirsty sect of the church. They were kind of like assassins. They would, I would say, they could withstand anything to accomplish their mission of death, because they were like kill and of no concern for my own life in doing it.
Yeah, that's true. These guys were very to the point where, I mean, they were bad people. That's the best way to say it. They were wicked.
And they didn't just suddenly turn good. That same kind of loyalty and oath to secrecy, and I don't mean sacredcy, I mean secrecy, still is infused in the Jesuits.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Would you say that the Jesuits and the Knights Templars were enemies?
Oh yeah, I would say so. I think the Knights Templar were actually trying to facilitate, the people in the best way that they knew. That's why they kind of created the banking system, the modern banking system that was taken from them, this check system.
And also, the Freemasons were the first ones to create a network of freedom fighters, right? Would you say in early Europe?
Yeah, I don't know if they were the first ones because locals were really fed up with the crown. They didn't like the crown. The crown would come and, I would say, assert their divine right over the people. And, for instance, Sir Andrew Agnew, who's my direct ancestor, was best friends with Edward the Bruce.
Mm-hmm.
So, who's a close friend of William Wallace. So we're rebels going way back, and none of my family respects the crown. In fact, we don't think the royals should exist at all.
I agree, and I think my Galactic Jedis agree with that as well. A super chat from Jimmy W. He says, everybody here better treat each other with respect or go away from Ishmael's lives. Don't make me call on Archon Michael. Archangel Michael, I think he meant to say. All right. Well, thank you for the super chat and for the reminder that it is better to just be kind at all times, guys. Let's all be kind here. I don't have a moderator, so if I have people that are just coming on the chat saying whatever they want, if they're being negative, I have no control of that, right? I don't have a moderator. I'm just having a conversation with Brooks Agnew. That's it. All right, so let's talk about artificial intelligence.
Oh yeah.
I know that's one of your favorite subjects.
Well, I mean, it's a subject that we watched develop. So in the early days, when we're building machines to assist people in high-speed manufacturing, and at first it was, spinning flywheels and cams and very dangerous stuff. Over time, we learned to teach programmable logic controllers to control different things like motors and solenoids and escapements and things like that, and made the machine smaller and cheaper and faster, more reliable, able to collect data. In the early days, they ran on digital tape, and then they went into, sizable hard drives. We had the Slick 150, and then a Slick 500, and then the PLC 5, and it got into fuzzy logic, which is logic that will learn within certain parameters. Then we had what are called PIDs, which will learn the best temperature, speed, and pressure at which to run a process in order to produce a given result. And then the computers got faster because they had to, because the only code that we really have to deal with is all binary. It's all ones and zeros. So you could, when you get to large numbers, you have a lot of ones and zeros. You have a lot of data to go through very, very fast. So I remember, just to put this little story in here, I was at UCI, University of California, Irvine, and I think it was 1967, and I was taking a test in genetics, and it was a computer test. So I was on a computer screen, black screen, white text, and I was answering the questions on the screen. And when I finished the test, I went into the computer room, which was really a room, 2-inch tape, going reel to reel like this. That was the computer. And the Canon rep, it was a Canon computer. The Canon rep was there, and he was upgrading the RAM, the random access memory on this computer. And when he finished, he said, well, I have just upgraded you to 8K of RAM. That is 8,000 calculations a second. No one will ever need more than 8K of RAM. Wow. Now we're to like 32 gig of RAM, and that's not enough. But the reason is because the programs became memory hogs, and we had to run the clocks faster and faster and faster and faster in order to make the programs practical, right? Mm-hmm. But of late, what we have figured out how to do is to go past binary code. Now we have trinary code, tertiary code, and we're generating what are called quantum computers, which work off of subatomic particle spin. So Massive programs take up very small amount of space because you can handle much more data in the same amount of time than what you can with a normal, say, i7 processor or dual i7 processors. And so it allows us to take that artificial intelligence to the next level. And that's where we are now. And we're just in the baby infant steps of it. Even the best AI out there is about, I don't know, I've put it through spaces and it's about a college sophomore, maybe, unless you repeatedly work with it over and over and over again. But if you look at, say, AI generated artwork, it isn't there yet. I mean, some things it does real well, but for instance, they don't do hands very well. They don't do teeth very well. There's just things it doesn't do very well. If you try to put it into, like, okay, write this story in the style of William Shakespeare or something like that, it will take you 10 iterations to get what you want.
Mhm.
But it is getting better. It is getting faster. And I don't think that that's all that scary. My contemporaries sometimes say AI is going to take over the world. And I just shake my head and say, no, it's not. No, it's not. Men with AI will take over the world, but not AI.
What about the AI that they're using in the private sector, in the SSP programs? I mean, you are familiar with the Dark Fleet, right? Now they've been working with AI.
No, I'm not familiar with the Dark Fleet. Like I said, I don't know anything about a galactic federation or any kind of secret space program or super soldier program. I'm just not there. I'm so deep into the current technology that we're using that I don't have any room for that in my head yet. I will someday, but not yet.
Understood. No worries, Brooks. Let's talk about alien AI. I mean, last time we talked over at the New Living Expo, you were saying that some of this negative AI or this alien AI is actually so advanced that it's able to infiltrate different galaxies, right, and destroy galaxies.
I haven't seen any galaxies destroyed. I mean, galaxy is a big thing, but one of the realizations that we have now that the James Webb Telescope is cold enough and we're beginning to take deep enough space pictures is that no matter how old, all the galaxies seem to be basically the same size, which really flies in the face of everything we know about the expansion of the universe. It's just not, it doesn't make any sense to us. And we're not talking about a small number of galaxies, millions of galaxies, and yet they're all basically the same size and of a very small variety of shapes. It is evident that there is some intelligence that's involved in all this. Let me give you an example. Some friends and I were sitting around one night, and I'm not gonna deny the fact there might have been copious amounts of scotch involved, but we were trying to figure out the odds of a carbon-based universe. And we were up to like 10 to the 99th or something like that. And then it hit me. The odds of a carbon-based universe are 1. It's the only kind of universe that can form. And they said, why? How did you come to that conclusion? I said, because all protons are identical. All protons are identical. They have the same set of frequencies, and the entire visible universe, every star in it, every particle of gas in it is identical. The protons are identical. The only difference is weight, which is a principle of holography, which I'll explain in a second. And what that says to me is that the harmony that makes up a proton can't be random. That means intelligence has to be involved. In order for a proton to exist, some kind of golden mean, some kind of math truism has to exist for that proton to exist, and that's intelligence.
What do you think about silicon-based intelligences?
It's totally possible, but it's not a silicon-based universe. It is a silicon-based intelligence. Give you an example. When Bell Labs first patented the transistor, for one thing, well, just as an aside, I don't see how they did it because they weren't coating boron onto silicon at that lab. They didn't do that kind of research. So for them to patent the transistor, I don't see how they did it. It had to be a download like you and I have been talking about. Second of all, the life that can exist with silicon as the basis is very limited. For instance, let me give an example. Human DNA is what's used to create chromosomes, which is used to create genes, right? So genes are our gene pairs in human are very limited. Not we don't even have as many gene pairs as a primate, to tell you the truth. And that means that each gene has a choice of proteins that it can make. Okay, it's a protein builder. That's what the program does. That's what the gene does, is create proteins. And for humans, each gene has a wide variety of proteins that it can make. And my brother headed up this program at Johns Hopkins, so I know quite a bit about it. They studied identical twins for generations. And what they discovered is at birth, the expression of the genes is identical. Very hard to tell the difference between the two babies. But by the time they're 12 or 24, the two bodies diverge. Things change. Bones in the face, sometimes the angle of the neck, all kinds of things in the bodies change, and it's pretty easy to tell the difference between the twins. And they could not explain why. They were trying to find, why do these genes choose different proteins? It should be rigid, right? But carbon is six-sided, and it allows a what we call a factorial. A factorial is 6 times 5 times 4 times 3 times 2 times 1, which is a large number of possibilities. And so what makes that gene choose those proteins is the environment. And they thought, well, how can that be? They're eating the same food. They're exposed to the same sunlight. They're around the same parents. They're exposed to the same radiation. For crying out loud, they wear the same clothes until they're like 10 or 11. Why do the genes choose different proteins? And what they realized is it was the spirit, because they're different people. The spirit was part of the environment. So the genes were choosing proteins based upon the will of the being inside. With silicon, you don't get that variety. So the number of proteins that you can make with silicon is very limited compared to carbon.
I see. But although it is the what they use to develop AI, silicon, right?
Yeah, but I think that when you're talking about beings, I think you're talking more of a gray. You just don't get a lot of variety.
How many extraterrestrials out there would you say are more cybernetic than they are biological? Or in other words, that they're silicon based as opposed to carbon based?
Well, it has to happen one of two ways. Either it's an upgrade, which we're talking about transhumanism or trans beingism, or they're created that way. And I hesitate to use the word born that way because I don't know if artificial beings actually are born or if they're built. It's not that far to jump. I mean, Adam was a built being. He was built from dirt by God and had the breath of life breathed into him. He had no belly button. He was never gestated in the body of a female. He was built. Eve, not so. Took Adam's rib, used that genetic material to fabricate a female gamete, and that gamete was gestated in a surrogate female. That baby was born, raised, and transported to Earth at the end of the 6th day.
Would you say that Adam was created in a test tube in a laboratory?
Well, it makes sense to me that he didn't go out in the middle of a cornfield and build him. Yes, I would say he was built that way. Interesting story about that too. Lucifer comes to Earth and sees Adam and says, "Hey, this is very good, but I can do that." And
Mhm.
God said, "Well, all right, have at it." So Lucifer bent down to scoop up a handful of dirt, and God said, "No, no, no, wait, 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 wait. You go get your own dirt." In other words, God created the dirt too,
Mhm.
and
Mhm.
Lucifer just can't start with those raw materials and go from there. So yeah, I think maybe he was created in a lab, built as a God class being, and infused with an intelligence.
And Eve was created as an extraction, right? From an extraction of Adam, you say.
Chemically, that's the wrong term. An extraction is how we make coffee,
Mhm.
but it was that genetic material was used to create a gamete.
I see. So, do you think that there were other humans before Adam and Eve that existed here? Like, how do
Yes,
you explain ancient advanced civilizations that had beings that were like super psychic and super spiritual, and in fact were immortal?
I don't know about those qualities, but I do know that in Genesis it clearly talks about creating male and female and commanding them to multiply and, by the way, replenish the earth,
Mhm.
which denotes that at one time earth was plenished and then it was wiped out. And so now there's a new set of humans to replenish the earth. But that was a different class of being. That's what the ancients call lower Adam. And when Cain was cast out of cast out of Eden, he went to the land of Nod to take a wife. So those humans already existed,
Mhm.
but they are of a different genetic class.
So, who do you think were the Atlanteans?
The what?
The Atlanteans.
Oh,
Been
well,
around for hundreds, thousands of years.
yes. That's probably of that first class. But the interesting thing is they stratified because you had Atlanteans, you had Lemurians, two different continents of people that obviously didn't get along with one another. And I'm always amazed at how even in on a planet thousands of miles apart, independently developing, they still manage to gear up and go to war with one another. It's like that war in heaven that just continues on wherever we go.
Yeah, that is again, that is the initial war that precipitated into the galactic wars, and really just the wars that brought down these ancient civilizations. I would say they were all part of that
It's
war.
clear on Earth there have been multiple zeniths of advanced humanoid life. We're not the only ones. In fact, our recorded history is just a fraction of the history on this planet.
So when do you think we were first seated here? How long ago? Millions of years, perhaps?
Well, it would make sense to me. The Earth was uh, certainly fertile and had plants and animals on it and plenty of oxygen for probably at least 40 million years. So it is possible several zeniths of humanoids have existed on this planet, which kind of denotes that maybe God had trial and error with this planet.
Hmm.
And it's probably not the only planet because I clearly remember living on another world, not this planet, but another world.
Tell us about that.
That's a good question. When I awakened my last time, I decided to get back into meditation. When I was young, I learned transcendental meditation, but honestly, it was just designed to put you to sleep, calm your mind, empty your mind, and you know, not really practical for somebody that wants to build stuff in their dream state. So I learned a style of meditation called Flower of Life meditation. Now it's not called that anymore. It's more heart meditation, and I could explain it to you if you want to, but I don't think we have time. Bottom line is, it allowed me to go back to a place where I came from to get here. And it was another world, 1,800 light years away, near the star Cygnus. And I say near because the star was a red giant. When I arrived at that world, I wasn't from that world. I was delivered to that world by a traveling race going through space and harvesting that world. My wife and I were put on that planet where we lived out our days. And when that star exploded, it took out that planet. And so that was 1,800 years ago. And I know this because the light from that red giant arrived here 2 years ago. So, and it's 1,800 light years away. So, plus or minus my lifetime, that's how far away it was. And I remember every detail about it. But it's nothing compared to this world, believe me. But it is quite spectacular.
Somebody has a question here for you, Brooks. They want to know what is your thoughts or theory about Mother Mary?
14 generations in the tribe of David. Obviously, a direct line to the crown. And when Gabriel met with her, she was around 12 years old. Not really sure what the process was, but the Spirit of God impregnated her. And whenever this happens in nature, women can have virgin births, providing the haploid DNA from their own mitochondria. They always give birth to a male son. And so it isn't that miraculous to believe that she was in communication with God through Gabriel, and that she conceived Jesus and gave birth to the Son of God.
So who do you think Jesus was in your perspective?
I think Jesus was a half God, half man, that he was in mortal form. So he suffered all the pains and frustrations any mortal would. But from his birth, he was in direct communication at will with the Father until his hanging on the cross. That's the only time the Father left him. He felt it instantly, and he realized why only at the last moment, and then finished the mission.
So he was the Son of God.
Yes.
Half human, half God.
Yes.
And because he came from the line of David, where do you think the line of David is traceable to? Where did it all begin?
Well, it's traceable back to Jacob, which is traceable to Abraham. So so goes the lineage. The bloodlines are remarkably important for humans. And I think it's maybe for the human race, not for humans, that is to say, our customs. The bloodline of Cain is very closely guarded. It is of utmost importance. That's why only Rothschilds or only, people of certain bloodlines are able to participate at the table, let's put it that way. And of course, there's rituals and things they have to go through. But the same thing is with David. However, the assertion is that the bloodline ended with Jesus because he died childless. Not so with Cain. That bloodline carried on, and it's that bloodline that we're at war with right now.
So you're saying that the bloodline of Cain is the bloodline of the elites that have been ruling this world for thousands of years.
Yeah, but I don't call them elites. I call them child eaters.
Child eaters. Oh, wait, hold on. We have to be careful. But yeah, I agree with you. Yeah, they're not elites. They're just the people that took power long ago and have been ruling this world for thousands of years. But I believe that their time is up. What is your perspective? I think that we are going to be seeing some sort of a huge transition.
Well, yes, but the psyop is full on. So This thing that we're seeing in our universities right now was planned a couple of years ago, right after the election of Virtual Joe. It is been infiltrating our universities for years, but the planning, all the flags, all the intifada towels, the bath towels that everybody's wearing, all that
Mhm.
stuff is printed and delivered and stored and warehoused, millions and millions of dollars spent and training in advance. And we're just now seeing this plan unfold in front of us, and the news is treating it like it's all new and all that. But you should know all this stuff is a pre-planned psyop.
Mhm.
I think what we really are seeing is the final desperate moves of you call them the elite, and
Well, let's just call them the let's just call them the cabal families.
all right, the cabal families, right? That's a good word for them. The bottom line is, though, that we're enlightened and we are sharing that light with one another. That's why they tried to lock us down for a couple of years, socially distance us and keep us apart. And I'll try not to cross any lines here, but they tried to break our line of communication, and they succeeded for a couple of years. Now we're trying to get that line of communication back open again, and I think it's coming on strong based on what I saw in San Rafael. How about you?
Well, I mean, it's what I'm seeing worldwide. It's happening everywhere. Look at all the resistance movements against the tyrannies going on, in France and
Oh
in
my
England.
gosh,
It's happening everywhere.
farmers and oh yeah, Ireland. Look at Ireland, man. I think they're about to tear the whole place apart.
Now, I want to hear your perspective. You mentioned that the two rivaling bloodlines that existed in ancient times, which have always been at war, we have the bloodline of the serpent through Cain, right? Whose
Mm,
father was Lucifer. And then we have the bloodline of, you could say, the angelics, right? That gave us Abraham, Jacob, King David. Let's just say the children, the descendants of Michael, right? If Lucifer gave us the reptilian race, and let's just say Michael gave us the angelic race.
yeah.
So,
Well, the bloodline would be Seth. So you had Seth and you had Cain. Yeah, you're exactly right.
yeah, so that's what I was going to. Is Cain was a progenitor of the serpent lineage of reptilian rule, and Seth was the progenitor of the line of King David. Would you agree?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, that's right.
You
And
don't. Go ahead.
well, what's important about it is that the DNA of Lucifer through Cain has to be in the body in order for a demon to dwell in that body, because of this thing called enmity. When there was this big argument, you read about it in Genesis, the argument between God and Lucifer after the dirty deed had been done. Lucifer was mad about being cursed and vowed to possess all the bodies that Adam and Eve make. And so
Mhm.
God said, well, not going to happen, because I'm going to put enmity between you and the seed of the woman. Now, I'm not exactly sure what enmity is, but I believe it is a DNA code that does not allow a demon to take that body by force. The person has to give up the body willingly. And so Cain's line, however, can be easily possessed by a demon. And that's why we're seeing these cabal leaders who really have no remorse. We call them psychopaths because they don't have any remorse, but really they're just demons.
Hey, I completely agree, my friend. In fact, in my book that I just re-released about 3 months ago, "The Secret Government: Invisible Architects," I traced this lineage all the way back to Ham, because even after the flood, after God tried to destroy it, it was reinstated by Noah's third son when he made a pact with the devil in Babylon, that gave us the Kish Nimrod bloodline, which again is the Cabal bloodline reinstated through the Babylonian lineages.
Wow. Yeah, you're absolutely right.
Mhm.
Yeah. And the Babylonians show up again in 600 BC to tear the whole thing apart.
And they're the reason why the lost 10 tribes of Israel needed to flee.
That's right.
What do you know about the lost 10 tribes of Israel? And were they really lost, or did they just kind of resurfaced or took refuge elsewhere?
Well, I think there are two or three tribes that we don't really know
Mhm.
who they are. I do know that in my brother's program at Johns Hopkins, one of his I guess main jobs at Johns Hopkins was to travel up the road north of Richmond and raise money for the university.
Mhm.
And one of the programs that they wanted to raise money was for mass sampling of DNA from people all over the world. And Congress wouldn't fund it. They just wouldn't go for it. So they decided to form a private company and they sold it. They sold the service to the public. And so the public paid money, anywhere from $99 to $150, sampled themselves and sent the DNA to them, and they started cataloging it. Well, in the early days, they didn't even know what they were looking at. But over time, what happened is they began to find the markers. And over the decades that 23andMe has existed now, it has refined this almost to where they can pinpoint a village that people came from, that their modern self descended from. And they're getting very, very good at this. I always told them, you guys are looking for Captain America, aren't you? But the truth is, they are looking for those markers. And I think one of the markers that they originally wanted to find, the reason why DARPA funded this as a private company, is they were looking for Kane's markers.
Which is the human hybrid reptilian, or the reptilian human hybrid bloodline.
Yeah. And then you have to ask, okay, so you find it. And then what are you going to do? Forced mass migration.
Makes a lot of sense, my friend. Makes a lot of sense. Um, let's. I just want to know one last thing about. Let's talk about alien AI. Have you ever heard anything about an alien AI?
No,
Okay.
I don't really even know. I mean, I know what alien is, but officially in the space industry, in the science industry I'm from, I mean, sometimes they think I'm an alien, but I don't really know. I've never met an off-worlder face to face. Sometimes I've seen technology that I ask the person, especially if they're like 19, where did you get this? And they can't tell me. They don't know. They just it was just given to them like a download gift. Like, Nikola Tesla claimed that all the technology he received was through dreams and visions. That's why it wasn't complete. That's why he didn't have notes, because
Mhm.
he didn't develop it. It was just handed to him, and he was trying to reverse engineer it.
But you are familiar with the extraterrestrial race known as the reptilians, right?
I can't deny that. I think that it's. I don't know. I mean, I sat down with David Icke years ago. We spoke on the same venue when he first came to the United States. Me and Danny and Brinkley and JJ Hertok, we were sitting around talking about his idea of the reptilians, and I asked him, so I mean, do their eyes? Do they have like cat eyes? Do they have forked tongues? Do they have scales for skin? And he really couldn't describe it to us any other way except that they have the mental ability to make others see them as human. And that's the only thing I couldn't buy about it. The idea that there might be some cold-blooded reptilian like human with scales and snake eyes is makes sense to me. Not maybe anywhere except New York City, but uh, they have to live in a different environment than us. We're warm blooded. We
Mhm.
can take winter temperatures down to, I don't know, I've been in 76 below zero with the right clothing, and we could take up to upwards of about 240 degrees Fahrenheit for extended periods of time. But reptilians can't.
Yeah, I heard that they were very cold blooded.
Yeah, they don't perform very well in hot temperatures either because the enzymes don't work. Enzymes require a very narrow temperature band to function. So you can't digest food. You can't turn fat into energy. ATP doesn't metabolize. So its enzymes have a very narrow temperature band. For humans, it's about probably 7 degrees, plus or minus 7 degrees.
So would you say that in a very heated environment where there is fire, the reptilians would probably die, right? Would you say?
Well, they don't die. They kind of go limp
Limp, I
because they
see.
can't make any energy. They just sit there and wait until the temperature drops again, and then they become mobile. But they also can't take temperatures. I think it's 19 degrees Celsius, somewhere around there. They go kind of dormant. They lose their sense of touch. Uh, so it's a very, like I said, narrow temperature band that they can exist, somewhere between 19 and 40 degrees Celsius.
Mhm. What do you think happened to Kate Middleton?
Ha! I I don't know if I could talk about this on YouTube.
If
Uh,
you can, speak in code.
okay.
You can spell out words if you can.
Well, at the time, there was a chemical that was being introduced by force, and it needed endorsement by the higher ups.
Mhm.
And so this it was kind of a bait and switch. When it first started out, the chemicals were kind of benign and they were, I think, helpful. And then they switched them out for a different technology, which has been laying around for quite some time. I actually experimented with some of it when I was in college, not me, but with mice, and we were able to induce disease in regular healthy mice, and then breed those mice and induce disease in the pups. So it meant that the disease was being inherited. So we were affecting actually congenital traits of this mouse artificially, which was really quite breakthrough and really quite frightening. The problem is that with humans, we get what are called reverse transcription errors. With mice, it happens 10 to 12% of the time. With humans, it's about 15 to 18% of the time. Now,
Mhm.
I remember I told you that DNA makes up chromosomes, genes, right? Well, these are very complex proteins. And to divide, what they have to do is unfold. So they unfold and they stretch out, and then they clone themselves or duplicate themselves, and then they wrap back up again into their macromolecular forms. That structure, the ladder that holds those proteins together, is actually where the error occurs. So when it folds back up again, the transcription error, which takes place from this special kind of chemical, it carries on to the next generation. And I don't mean kids, I mean the next generation of cell. So when your cells begin to replace themselves, they're not human anymore. They begin to change rapidly. And so we call this turbo cancer. We're seeing what's called turbo cancers in people. So where you might have a little, spot on your lung, you now have a shotgun blast in your lungs. Where you might have, say, a small melanoma on your skin, you now have endocrine system or lymphoma. It just blossoms everywhere, just like a parasite, just like a parasite does. In fact, it's a parasitic action. Humans have never faced that before, ever. And I think that's what happened to Kate Middleton. She had some surgery. What was discovered is the cancer was everywhere. It wasn't just where they were operating. It had gone everywhere. And I failed to use, I don't want to use the word metastasize, because that's what happens when a cancer grows and it gets so large that it begins to latch onto the spine and then the liver. And this went everywhere. And it's very typical, and it's not curable. Well, it is curable, but nobody in that community wants to participate in the cure.
What about King S? I don't want to. Well, he used to be the incumbent. That was so-called the King of England. Didn't he also have cancer?
Yes, yeah, it's basically the same thing. And the more these leaders forced this upon their people, and it was militant, to watch what happened in Australia, to watch what happened in Ireland. It's It's like nothing you ever saw, nothing we've ever seen in government before. In this country, there are about 128 million people that have been exposed. Every 40 seconds, someone in the United States has a stroke. We've never had that ever before, ever in history.
And let me just clear this up with what he's referring to, everyone. He's referring to the medicine.
Right.
All right, because we want to make sure this stays up. Wow. Yeah, makes a lot of sense. And you mentioned last time, 2 weeks ago, that this is something that they use in order to convert the biological life forms into machines. Would you say?
Yeah, I said that, and I kind of imply that this transhumanism is on a molecular level.
Mhm.
And you know what's interesting? I find it very interesting that all these conferences that I go to, no matter where I go to, hundreds of people from all walks of life, all ages, none of them took the.
Yeah.
How could that be? How could they be so enlightened, so full of love, so full of energy, so full of trust, and not fall for that? It's because I don't know. It's because of the light. And the crazy thing is, all the people I know that I've met in my life that have had they're off. Something's wrong.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. A lot. I mean, trust me. I still know people that have gotten that, and all of a sudden they're completely different. As
We're
if some.
divided. I
Yeah,
call it the grand division in my book, the grand division. I didn't
absolutely.
know really what would cause it. I didn't think it would be that, but my goodness, it divided families, it divided companies, it divided lifelong friends. They just walked away from one another just like that.
So, would you agree that that is what would be the beginning stages of the mark of the beast?
Sure sounds like it to me. It matches all of the, classic descriptions of what we think the mark of the beast is.
Yeah, that's what I've been saying for years. In fact, I think ever since I first came on the scene 3.5 years ago, I think when I first got my Instagram, and I was actually not taken down, but that video was taken down from my. When all of a sudden, as they were rolling that out, I was telling everybody, "Hey, this is the mark of the beast," and some people were triggered with that, and some people were like, "Ishmael, you know what? It makes a lot of sense." But
Yeah.
and let's just take maybe one more question. I do want to say thank you so much for your time. We've been at it for almost 2 hours. So let's just take one last question.
Sure.
Can you see the chat? Do you want to pick your question?
Yeah, I can see the chat, but it's moving pretty fast.
Okay. Let's see. I've always thought that about Mark of the Beast. Does that not scream? Okay. Let's see. If you guys have a question for Brooks, this is your chance. We're almost at the 2-hour limit.
Well, it says in the scriptures that in the last days the light shall shine and the darkness shall comprehend it not.
Yeah, I do remember reading that in the scriptures. Absolutely.
And you think to yourself, how could that be? How could you shine a light in the darkness and people can't see it? Because they don't resonate with the energy anymore. They can't. They've been altered.
It's a disconnect from God.
Yeah.
It's a disconnect from God. But again, guys, even if you were coerced to take it, don't think that you're not going to make the positive timeline, all right? I know I have a few watchers here that were forced or coerced to take it in order to keep their livelihood going. Just bear in mind that, if you were coerced, there's still a chance that you could actually, dissolve it from your body, okay? I talked about.
I was retired early because I wouldn't do it.
Oh, I feel you on that. I think a lot of us, people that are awakened rather. I don't want to use the word awoke, but awakened, lost their jobs as a result of that. So, Brooks, do you have any final remarks that you want to leave us with? I know I'm going to go ahead and put your website, if you have any links in the description, so that way people can follow you. But do you have any final remarks that you want to leave us with?
Well, I firmly believe that everything we do will eventually affect the universe.
Mhm.
So I think we should do it on purpose. I think a lot of times we feel like our life and our life condition is handed to us and we don't have any choice in the matter. Your choices up to this time are what have landed you where you are right now. And so you need to be able to travel to the future and look back at this moment where you are and see if this is where you want to be. If this is not where you want to be, you could choose a new future. And don't be afraid to do that.
Thank you, Brooks Agnew. I appreciate your time and your wisdom. And yeah, I'm going to go ahead and put your links in the description. And I thank you so much for being here. Appreciate your time, brother.
And remember, if you guys buy my books off Amazon, they're all for sale on Amazon. Inside the cover is an email address. If you write to me, I will give you the audio version of that book for free. So if you're not a great reader, don't worry about it. I read it for you.
Love it. Love it. All right. Well, thank you so much for being here, guys. And I also appreciate the Galactic Jedis for tuning in. I hope you guys have a beautiful evening. May the God Force be with you today on May the 4th. May the Force be with you. Have a good night.